The Western Allied invasion of Germany was conducted by the Western Allies in the final months of fighting in the European theatre of World War II. The Allied invasion of Germany started with the Western Allies crossing the River Rhine in March 1945 before fanning out and overrunning all of Western Germany from the Baltic in the north to Austria in the south before the Germans surrendered on 8 May 1945. This is known as the Central Europe Campaign in United States military histories. By early 1945, events favored the Allied forces in Europe. On the Western Front, the Allies had been fighting in Germany since the Battle of Wacken in October 1944 and by January had turned back the Germans. In the Battle of the Bulge, the failure of this last major German offensive exhausted much of Germany's remaining combat strength, leaving it ill-prepared to resist the final Allied campaigns in Europe. Additional losses in the Rhineland further weakened the German army, leaving shattered remnants of units to defend the east bank of the Rhine. On the 7th of March, the Allies seized the last remaining intact bridge across the Rhine at Remagen, and had established a large bridgehead on the river's east bank. During Operation Lumberjack and Operation Plunder in February to March 1945, German casualties are estimated at 400,000 men, including 280,000 men captured as prisoners of war. On the Eastern Front, the Soviet Red Army had captured most of Poland and were nearing Berlin. The Soviets also pushed into Hungary and eastern Czechoslovakia, and temporarily halted at what is now the modern German border on the Oder-Neisse line. These rapid advances on the Eastern Front destroyed additional veteran German combat units and severely limited the German leader Adolf Hitler's ability to reinforce his Rhine defenses. Thus, as the Western Allies completed the preparations for the final drive into the heart of Germany, victory for the Allies seemed within sight. Order of battle. Allied forces. At the very beginning of 1945, the Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force on the Western Front, General Dwight Eisenhower, had 73 divisions under his command in northwestern Europe, of which 49 were infantry divisions, 20 armored divisions and 4 airborne divisions. 49 of these divisions were American, 12 British, 8 French, 3 Canadian and 1 Polish. Another 7 American divisions arrived during February, along with the British 5th Infantry Division and 1st Canadian Corps, both of which had arrived from the fighting on the Italian front. As the invasion of Germany commenced, General Eisenhower had a total of 90 full-strength divisions under his command, with the number of armored divisions now reaching 25. The Allied front along the Rhine stretched 450 miles from the river's mouth at the North Sea, in the Netherlands to the Swiss border in the south. The Allied forces along this line were organized into 3 army groups. In the north, from the North Sea to a point about 10 miles north of Cologne, was the 21st Army Group commanded by Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. Within 21st Army Group, the Canadian 1st Army held the left flank of the Allied line, with the British 2nd Army in the center and the U.S. 9th Army to the south. Holding the middle of the Allied line from the 9th Army's right flank to a point about 15 miles south of Mainz was the 12th Army Group under the command of Lieutenant General Omar Bradley. Bradley had 2 American armies, the U.S. 1st Army on the left and the U.S. 3rd Army on the right. Completing the Allied line to the Swiss border was the 6th Army Group commanded by Lieutenant General Jacob L. Devers, with the U.S. 7th Army in the north and the French 1st Army on the Allied right and southernmost flank. As these 3 army groups cleared out the Wehrmacht west of the Rhine, Eisenhower began to rethink his plans for the final drive across the Rhine and into the heart of Germany. Originally, General Eisenhower had planned to draw all his forces up to the west bank of the Rhine, using the river as a natural barrier to help cover the inactive sections of his line. The main thrust beyond the river was to be made in the north by Montgomery's 21 Army Group, elements of which were to proceed east to a juncture with the U.S. First Army as it made a secondary advance northeast from below the Ruhr River. If successful, this pincer movement would envelop the industrial Ruhr area, neutralizing the largest concentration of German industrial capacity left. German forces facing the Allies was Oberbefehlshaber West, commanded by General Feldmarschall Albert Kesselring, who had taken over from General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt on the 10th of March. Although Kesselring brought an outstanding track record as a defensive strategist with him from the Italian campaign, he did not have the resources to make a coherent defense. During the fighting west of the Rhine up to March 1945, the German army on the Western Front had been reduced to a strength of only 26 divisions, organized into 3 army groups. Little or no reinforcement was forthcoming as the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht continued to concentrate most forces against the Soviets. It was estimated that the Germans had 214 divisions on the Eastern Front in April. On the 21st of March, Army Group H headquarters became Oberbefehlshaber Nordwest, commanded by Ernst Busch, leaving the former Army Group H commander, Johannes Blaskowitz, to lead Army Command Netherlands, cut off in the Netherlands. Busch, whose main unit was the German 1st Parachute Army, was to form the right wing of the German defenses. In the center of the front, defending the Ruhr, Kesselring had Field Marshal Walther Model commanding Army Group B, and in the south Paul House's Army Group G. Eisenhower's plans. After capturing the Ruhr, General Eisenhower planned to have the 21st Army Group continue its drive east across the plains of northern Germany to Berlin. The 12th and 6th Army Groups were to mount a subsidiary offensive to keep the Germans off balance and diminish their ability to stop the northern thrust. This secondary drive would also give Eisenhower a degree of flexibility in case the northern attack ran into difficulties. For several reasons, Eisenhower began to readjust these plans toward the end of March. First, his headquarters received reports that Soviet forces held a bridgehead over the Oder River, 30 miles from Berlin. Since the Allied armies on the Rhine were more than 300 miles from Berlin, with the Elbe River 200 miles ahead still to be crossed, it seemed clear that the Soviets would capture Berlin long before the Western Allies could reach it. Eisenhower thus turned his attention to other objectives, most notably a rapid meet-up with the Soviets to cut the German army in two and prevent any possibility of a unified defense. Once this was accomplished, the remaining German forces could be defeated in detail. In addition, there was the matter of the Ruhr. Although the Ruhr area still contained a significant number of Axis troops and enough industry to retain its importance as a major objective, Allied intelligence reported that much of the region's armament industry was moving southeast, deeper into Germany. This increased the importance of the southern offensives across the Rhine. Also focusing Eisenhower's attention on the southern drive was concern over the national redoubt. Quote, according to rumor, Hitler's most fanatically loyal troops were preparing to make a lengthy, last-ditch stand in the natural fortresses formed by the rugged alpine mountains of southern Germany and western Austria. If they held out for a year or more, dissension between the Soviet Union and the Western Allies might give them political leverage for some kind of favorable peace settlement. In reality, by the time of the Allied Rhine crossings, the Wehrmacht had suffered such severe defeats on both the eastern and western fronts that it could barely manage to mount effective delaying actions, much less muster enough troops to establish a well-organized Alpine resistance force. Still, Allied intelligence could not entirely discount the possibility that remnants of the German army would attempt a suicidal last stand in the Alps. Denying this opportunity became another argument for rethinking the role of the southern drive through Germany. Perhaps the most compelling reason for increasing the emphasis on this southern drive had more to do with the actions of Americans than those of Germans. While Montgomery was carefully and cautiously planning for the main thrust in the north, complete with massive artillery preparation and an airborne assault, American forces in the south were displaying the kind of basic aggressiveness that Eisenhower wanted to see. On the 7th of March, Lieutenant General Courtney Hodges' U.S. First Army captured the last intact bridge over the Rhine at Remagen and steadily expanded the bridgehead to the south in the Saar-Palatinate region. Lieutenant General George S. Patton's U.S. Third Army had dealt a devastating blow to the German 7th Army and, in conjunction with the U.S. 7th Army, had nearly destroyed the German First Army. In 5 days of battle, from 18 to 22 March, Patton's forces captured over 68,000 Germans. These bold actions eliminated the last German positions west of the Rhine. Although Montgomery's drive was still planned as the main effort, Eisenhower believed that the momentum of the American forces to the south should not be squandered by having them merely hold the line at the Rhine, or make only limited diversionary attacks beyond it. By the end of March, the Supreme Commander thus leaned toward a decision to place more responsibility on his southern forces. The events of the first few days of the final campaign would be enough to convince him that this was the proper course of action. Occupation process. When Allied soldiers arrived in a town, its leaders and remaining residents typically used white flags, bed sheets, and tablecloths to signal surrender. The officer in charge of the unit capturing the area, typically a company or battalion, accepted responsibility over the town. Soldiers posted copies of General Eisenhower's proclamation number 1, which began with "We come as conquerors, not as oppressors." The proclamation demanded compliance with all orders by the commanding officer, instituted a strict curfew and limited travel, and confiscated all communications equipment and weapons. After a day or two, Specialized Office of Military Government, United States units took over. Soldiers requisitioned housing and office space as needed from residents. At first this was done informally, with occupants evicted immediately and taking with them few personal possessions, but the process became standardized, with 3 hours notice and OMG-US personnel providing receipts for buildings' contents. The displaced residents nonetheless had to find housing on their own.